Well, it's time to go to work again. This time we're going to really focus on things that occurred in Texas with Jesse James and some of his comrades. I had the pleasure of meeting a man by phone, never met him in person, whose name was Jay. And he helped me understand some of the things that Bud had told me about and really went in depth with it. It's in the book, and it's amazing how it all comes together, and there's plenty of evidence to show that Bud was right and also Jay was right. It's a fascinating story, and probably one of the most interesting one that I was never aware of about Jesse James. And I think a lot of people were the same way. We only had a depiction of an outlaw who had been in the Confederate guerrillas, who was a vicious, bloodthirsty man. But there was so much more to Jesse James than we'll ever know. So let's dig in and find out the truth behind the man Jesse Woodson James.
But our sacred well was guarded by the men who knew us well. Quantrill's oath took care of that, which you know don't ever tell. A poem called The Men of Quantrill by Jesse James, alias Frank Dalton. Why did a man or a woman in those days get swept up into this line of work? It is hard to say, and it is hard to understand. We were not there, nor did we walk in their boots. Hardcastle says some good folks were just changed by the times. Some were coerced in the wrong place at the wrong time, and some, like Jesse, were caught in a brutal, uncivilized, synchronized effort to divide America. He watched his family being tortured and murdered, stripped of everything, and felt the excruciating pain on his own body and trying to defend his own. What would you have done? Bud says, if you were any kind of man and witnessed your family going through this horror, you would have done the same thing.
Whoever is careless with the truth in small matters cannot be trusted with important matters. Albert Einstein. Chapter 9. The Spy System and the Knights of the Golden Circle. The question now in the mind of the reader is this: was Jesse James the son of a Baptist preacher and described as a Bible-toting man by Jesse's cook and close friend, John Trammell? Immersed in the philosophy of the radical Freemasons led by Albert Pike, Jesse Woodson James was naturally a perfect candidate to initiate into the secret organizations. During Jesse's service in the war, between the ages of 15 to 17, he had all the qualities of a valued surety, being young and clinging on a deeper hatred for the Yankees. Jesse was the perfect subject to coerce, manipulate, and sway into an ideology that was branded into his very being through the emotions that flooded his spirit during the darkest days of America. He could never get over the abuse, loss, and suffering bestowed upon his family and the Southern people. The outlet for Jesse's emotions and his revengeful spirit was of course released in the brutal type of warfare he was involved in, but he wanted more. He was willing to believe and engage in any kind of activity to destroy the destroyer of his family, homestead, and their way of life. During his time with Quantrill and Bloody Bill Anderson, he was being carefully watched and observed. The men were impressed with his fervor. They saw that Jesse's emotions could be funneled into a brotherhood whose missions met his passion, the South. The secret societies that developed before, during, and after the war were filled with intrigue and mystery indeed. Many men joined just to know the secrets and to become a part of something greater than themselves and an opportunity to become a hero in the protection of the South. But were they given fiery propaganda and just enough of the mystical concealed knowledge to lure them in? In the last chapter, Albert Pike and Manly Hall confirms this. If you can believe it, the Knights of the Golden Circle were more elusive and mysterious than Freemasonry. They were indeed connected to Freemasonry, as many of the other secret societies are, but the KGC kept their mouths shut. A book written by a former KGC member, R.H. Williams, who had ties with the organization at the very beginning and throughout the war, wrote, "In those days, the Southern states, with their great institution, slavery, were at the zenith of their power, and were ambitious of extending it beyond the boundary to which they had been restricted, the Missouri Compromise of 1820. Bud Hardcastle. In the early 1980s, Bud began publicly speaking of his discoveries of the secret society, the Knights of the Golden Circle. Ears were not ready to hear what had been kept secret for over a century. Bud was shot down numerous times by the media and told, "There is no such thing." Bud proved them wrong. At the turn of the 21st century, others began following Bud's path and did a little research on their own, publishing their findings. There are several excellent books out there now that help prove the existence of the KGC and prove Bud was right all along, who was one of the earlier truth-sayers to reveal this.
When I started talking to Bud and really getting to know him and really getting to know the story of Jesse, he started telling me about the background of Jesse in these secret societies and how he was all tied up with so many organizations that kept their mouths shut. He didn't tell Ola and Aubrey Everhard everything, and he didn't tell them about the buried gold. But Bud found a lot of information out there when nobody in the 80s were talking about it. Nobody was writing about it, and the newspapers said, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. There's no such thing as the Knights of the Golden Circle." Well, Bud proved them wrong. And now it's coming out more and more that Bud was right. So, trying to understand it, being overwhelmed by the information that Bud was giving me, I had to understand it further. I did a lot of research in 2022, and that was really amazing what I found. So I called Bud, asked him if it would be all right if I would talk to Jay Longley in Brownwood. I found a lot of information on the website that he had that explained the Knights of the Golden Circle. He said, "Oh, certainly, yes." So there was a part of Bud that was very cautious with what he was telling me, and I think it was to protect me, and he had a lot of chivalry, like Jesse did, on protecting the women folk. And I think that's why Jesse never did really tell Ola about the secret societies, except he told her that he was in the Odd Fellows. He was a Freemason, which he was a 33rd Freemason. And he also told her and showed her a medal or a little keychain emblem on his watch chain that said Knights of the Pythias. And that was pretty important to him because he always kept that on his keychain. So I called Jay Longley. We talked for a good while, and I learned a lot about the depth of the Knights of the Golden Circle and how they infiltrated Texas. And it really blew me away. So I want to honor Jay and what he helped me with, and helped understand a lot of things that was very foreign to me, I guess you'd say. Anyway, we're going to delve into what Jay disclosed to me and some pictures that he had. He's given me full permission to use these pictures, these photos, to explain his venture into Jesse Woodson James, but also in Bloody Bill Anderson, which we connect together, ironically, as Bloody Bill's mother was a Thomason, and that's part of my family, and Bloody Bill Anderson's son, Storm Anderson, was Jay's great uncle. You can't make this up, like Bud said. So take a listen.
Gone to Texas.
Brownwood was a hot spot for the KGC and Knights Templar, and we will further zoom in to the significance of that small town in central Texas. Bud, he is the foremost historian on Jesse James, more than any other one I know of. Nobody is more knowledgeable about Jesse Woodson James than Bud Hardcastle, said Longley to the writer. Jay Longley is a historian, treasure hunter, and researcher. His interest began in 2006 when he read Rebel Gold by Warren Gettler and Bob Brewer. Bud Hardcastle was mentioned in the book as being a valuable source of deciphering codes and signs in treasure hunting, providing maps and the characteristics and path of Jesse James. Knights of the Golden Circle. What was their purpose? Jay Longley and Colin Eby's write-up on the KGC website explaining the KGC and the stories caught the eye of the Texas State Historical Society. The society contacted Jay and Colin, asking them if they could update the article they had on the KGC on their website because it was very outdated, and a lot of it was hearsay. The TSHC fact-checked it thoroughly, approved it, and published it on their website exactly how Jay and Colin had written it. After 3 months of remaining on the website, Jay said they were barraged by naysayers and their enemies. Using fake names, these people began complaining to the president of the society that this was fake, that this was false. The president ordered it to be taken down, and the old article, the one that had false information, was put back up. With permission from J. Longley, here is an excerpt of the write-up from his website describing the KGC's goal. The Knights of the Golden Circle was to become the most powerful, secret, and subversive organization in the history of the United States, with members in every state and territory before the end of the Civil War. The primary economic and political goal of this organization was to create prosperous, slave-holding Southern Empire extending the shape of a circle from the proposed capital at Havana, Cuba, through the southern states of the United States, Mexico, the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, and Central America. The plan was also called for the acquisition of Mexico, which was then to be divided into 15 new slave-holding states, which would shift the balance of power in Congress in favor of slavery. Facing the Gulf of Mexico, these new states would form a large crescent. The robust economy the KGC hoped to create would be fueled by cotton, sugar, tobacco, rice, coffee, indigo, and mining. The 7 industries would employ slave labor. Jesse was fully immersed in the Knights of the Golden Circle. When he gave his oath, he gave his life. It is unknown when Jesse joined, but Bud believes it was during the war. There is evidence that the KGC supported Quantrill and his men. Bud stated that Quantrill was one of the original leaders of the KGC. The men who were in the KGC inner sanctum were Uncle George Payne, the secretary, Jesse James, the comptroller and paymaster, Frank James, Jefferson Davis, General Bud Dalton, Professor B.E. Bedizek, Cole Younger, General J.O. Shelby, Nathan Bedford, Forrest, and Jack Brack Miller. Of course, some of these men were using an alias. Many believe that a Cincinnati doctor, George William Lamb Bickley, founded the KGC, Knights of the Golden Circle, in 1854. Newspapers, mostly Union, speak of him as the founder and as a scoundrel, a con man, a liar, etc. Bud Hardcastle believes he was just another pawn in the game. There are many who agree with Bud, who believe there was a much bigger picture in the development of the Knights of the Golden Circle. Mr. Longley wrote that his research revealed that the KGC started a whole lot earlier than what has been documented. Longley's article explains that it had its beginnings in the mid-1830s, along with several Southern rights clubs that were formed to reestablish the African slave trade. The clubs followed the ideology of the secret organization called the Order of the Lone Star, which had set the stage for the Texas Revolution, fighting for independence from Mexico. The KGC may have been established further back to the Revolutionary War, in which at that time the organization was known as the Sons of Liberty. 3 other men who have been noted as part of the scheme to design the Knights of the Golden Circle were John Slidell, Judah Benjamin, and Albert Pike, who would be in control of the southern jurisdiction. Judah Benjamin, a Jewish senator for Louisiana, and Albert Pike, 1809 to 1891, the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry's southern jurisdiction sovereign grand commander, were noted as the brains of the Confederacy. It became quite evident that these men and Freemasonry were the brains, arms, and legs of the Knights of the Golden Circle. These 2 gentlemen met frequently at the Pickwick Club in New Orleans. It is here that Pike has been noted as writing the bylaws and rituals of the Knights of the Golden Circle. Pike had already begun to revise the rituals, bylaws, and degrees of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry. The 2 orders were similar in nature, but apparently had different goals. Benjamin was later appointed by Jefferson Davis President of the Confederacy as Attorney General, Secretary of War, Secretary of State, and Chief of Intelligence of the Confederacy. Many believe that the Knights of the Golden Circle was formed into the Confederate intelligence or Confederate underground. Judah Benjamin was known to have transferred Confederate money to personal bank accounts in Europe. It has been thoroughly documented that Benjamin had the backing of both the British and French Rothschilds. He was their agent. Albert Pike was grooming himself as well to take control of the Southern mission and its role in the Civil War. His philosophy now had an avenue or byway, creating an opportunity to expand throughout the country. The KGC began growing and organizing into a membership of 48,000. They were building their own army and recruiting rapidly in the North and South. The strength in this organization lay within the boundaries of Texas, where 32 KGC castles were established, which are similar to the Freemasonry temples or lodges. The numbers 32 and 33 are important in both Freemasonry and the KGC. Marshall, Texas was claimed to be the capital of Missouri during the Civil War, with a heavy KGC presence in East Texas. In 1944, Frank Dalton, or Jesse, told a newspaper reporter for the Marshall News Messenger, August 13, 1944, that he was one of the escorts that helped Governor Claiborne F. Jackson of Missouri move the official seal and many of the official records to a house which still stands at the southwest corner of East Crockett and South Boulevard. The governor took up his residence across the street east and made it the official governor's mansion. Prior to the Civil War, San Antonio was the headquarters of the U.S. troops in Texas, where KGC members and secessionists stormed their fort in the bloodless takeover of San Antonio. The U.S. troops handed over San Antonio, which became the KGC's national headquarters. A plan to invade Mexico was on the KGC's agenda, and approximately 1,000 knights were willing to meet on the border in Brownsville to begin the invasion. A looming cloud, the KGC changed their course and concentrated their fight to secede from the Union and sway the Southern governors to do the same. This new direction took them north, where they would become agitators, starting fires, pro-secession rallies, and creating fear and uncertainty in the communities. During this same time, Texas Rangers, whose many members were Knights, were coordinating an effort to seize U.S. forts and take over D.C., preventing President Lincoln from taking office in 1861. The kidnapping of Abraham Lincoln was in the works. This never happened. Members of the KGC began recruiting and forming units of the Confederacy and partisan Rangers and Raiders with many members, such as Quantrill Raiders. Pike's interest focused on using mighty warriors who knew savage warfare tactics. He turned to the Indian nations in Indian Territory. The KGC planted men in the Union Army, including officers of high rank to spy and plant seeds of ill will. They were given special insignias to wear to identify themselves to the Brotherhood. One of these would be a 5-point copper star pin worn on the left lapel. They also used forms of hand signals and other means to protect them in battle from the rebels' bullet. Even though soldiers may have been wearing the blue uniform or vice versa, there was still some degree of caution regarding the true sentiment they were carrying. It has been documented in books that CSA soldiers stole Union uniforms to confuse the enemy. Jesse James himself speaks of doing this. It is astounding to learn how intricate the web of secret networks merged and spread across the country during the Civil War, causing the bloodiest and most catastrophic disaster in American history. The weapons of the Knights. Pike was heavily involved in stirring the flame during the war, and the secret societies and spy rings evolved within themselves, expanding into others. It was all in the plan. The organization of the Knights of the Golden Circle, which name would be changed several times to the Order of American Knights and Sons of Liberty, was encamped in the north and the south. Infiltration of spies began expanding into the organization, deeply embedded in the KGC, who had various disguises, working their way into a number of lodges to learn of their secrets and plans. Spies Within, in the Journal and Gazette by Colonel A.E. Redstone. On the other hand, infiltration of the Knights expanded into public offices, every known profession, behind enemy lines, and deep into the bowels of foreign affairs. The Southerners' View. In the Daily National Democrat, February 13, 1861, in Marysville, California, the paper stated that the KGC were going to establish a Southern Republic composed of Sonora, Chihuahua, Lower California, Arizona, Mexico, New Mexico, Kansas, Missouri, Louisiana, a portion of Georgia, a portion of Alabama, and South Carolina, Mississippi, and Texas. The society has been in operation since 1855. The main reason why they formed was the election of a Republican president, just cause for the dissolution of the Union. Out of the LaGrange True Issue, LaGrange, Texas, it spoke of the KGC's members as being the most respectable and enterprising citizens of that county. It was growing in leaps and bounds, fueling division and power amongst the citizens of this country. The newspapers were utilized to communicate between members in codes, numerology, and propaganda. David C. Jones, a surgeon in the 2nd Regiment of the KGC, wrote in the Telegraph that the KGC organization is composed of some of the most respectable and influential men of the South, and it is as true to Southern principles as the needle to the pole. R.H. Williams in San Antonio, who served in the Southern Committee of Safety, involved in the takeover of San Antonio with Texas Rangers Ben McCulloch in the lead, and a member of the KGC, stated in his book that he was well known as Sound on the Goose, meaning a good Southern man. As we read later, goose was a key word used in this time period and used quite frequently in the KGC.
We learned from Bud Hardcastle and Lou Kilgore's research that the goose was a significant symbol and password used in the Knights of the Golden Circle. It could be used as a symbol, like a three-toed footprint, or broad arrow as a directional marker for treasure, similar to the turkey track that Bud always spoke of. The symbol was similar to Templar-related markings. Also, an assembly or cluster of symbols was thought to be depicting the goose's nest where treasure is located. It also represented themes of the Southland: Southern gentlemen, guidance, safety, loyalty, wisdom, bravery, courage, faithfulness, resilience, perseverance, and protection of his comrades and wealth. Several revelations of this occurred during Bud's physical and active research into the life of J. Frank Dalton, who Bud discovered was the real Jesse Woodson James. Here is one example. Joe Wood, an exceptional writer, investigator, photographer for the St. Louis Globe Democrat newspaper, had met J. Frank Dalton at Merrimack Caverns in 1949. At first, Joe did not think he was the real Jesse James. He investigated every inch of Dalton, gathering facts and accumulated frustration. When Joe tried numerous times to dive into Dalton's family and to find gang members who were still living, Joe needed more proof, but Uncle Jesse, as Joe called him, wouldn't give it up until it caused so much friction between Joe and Rudy Turilli, who knew who Dalton really was. The old man wanted to keep the peace, so he allowed a peek through a door of his past that had been kept shut for decades.
Well, I'd asked him many times if there was a member of the gang who was still living that could collaborate his story. And he would always say, "Nah, boys," he said, "you don't think any other member of the gang lived to be 100, do you?" And he'd dismiss it. Well, this went on for about 4 months into it, and it was affecting Rudy, my friendship, because Rudy was convinced that he was, and I wasn't. I told Rudy I thought that this was getting too serious between us and our difference of opinion, and that I was going to bow out. And so Rudy went to Uncle Jesse and told him about my fitness. He insisted on seeing us together. And he said, "Now you boys," yeah, they never talked to us as Joe or Rudy, he always called us "you boys," you know. He said, "You boys, I've become fond of you," and he says, "I don't want to see something happen between you that would be my fault." So he said, "I'm going to answer a question you've asked many times, and I'm going to tell you, yes, there is a man that's still alive that I didn't do since I was a boy." And he gave me the name of Colonel James Davis, who lived in Nashville, Tennessee. And he told us that he had been instrumental in getting him into Quantrill's guerrillas. Of course, that gives something to be excited about. He wrote us a letter to Colonel Davis, and we were out in Nashville. And I won't tell you all the details about this meeting, but when Rudy gave him the letter from Dalton, but Davis looked at it and read it, took off his glasses, and he said, "Well, this doesn't tell me a damn thing." So Rudy leaned forward and he said, "What do you mean it don't tell you a thing?" And Davis said, "Well, I'm too old to go traveling across country on a wild goose chase." Well, we knew that Jesse had played another one of these little games with us. He got a lot of kick out of doing that. And we spent the night in a motel and got up the next morning, and we were devastated by the results of our trip. But when Rudy spoke, he was cussing Jesse out. He knew that he played another trick on it. So he was so angry with him when we got back. He listened to our burst of anger, and then he had a good belly laugh, and he said, "Now, boys, you can't stay mad at an old man for having a little fun once in a while." He said, "Now, I'll go give you another letter." And he said, "Davis will come back with you." So I told Rudy, I'm so damn mad. I said, "Rudy, I'm not going driving back to Nashville." I said, you want to go, you can go."
Joe Wood was pretty upset with Jesse and refused to go. But Rudy set off again. Only this time with the magic password, the password. The goose flies high. Rudy got to Davis's door and knocked with a little bit of fear in his heart. Colonel Davis answered the door, and before anything was said, Rudy quickly blurted out, "The goose flies high." Colonel Davis, with a different tone, replied, "Everything is lovely. Where's Jesse?" Rudy told Davis where Jesse was and gave him the letter. Even after a slight heart attack, Colonel Davis wanted to go right then. Jesse told Rudy and Joe that old John Trammell lived 10 miles outside of Guthrie, Oklahoma. This was about the area where Jesse had his ranch after the run of 1889. It may have been the exact place. Rudy and Joe went to the Guthrie Hotel where Eugene Robertson, Trammell's nephew, worked as a bellhop. After he got off work, Mr. Robertson drove them out to the farm of John Trammell, Jesse's old cook. When they got to John's home, Rudy told John that Jesse James had sent for him. John Trammell said, "I don't know any such person." After several attempts and coercing, Rudy finally said, "The goose flies high." John replied, "Everything is lovely. Where's Jesse?" John insisted that they leave immediately. Here was Jesse, ready to celebrate his 102nd birthday on September 5, 1949. Colonel Davis, age 108, and John Trammell, age 110, joined together to celebrate with the high goose. Jesse was still flying high, and everything was lovely, and Jesse was safe. Bud said that was extreme loyalty to one another. Under Quantrill, they had agreed to go to their comrade in need, even if it cost them their own life. This is exactly what they did. When did this loyalty and devotion begin? It began within the boundaries of the tight-lipped Quantrill raiders. War was hell, but the aftermath was 10 times worse for those who supported the Confederacy, and was far worse than the Civil War itself. The Men of Quantrill, by Frank Dalton. When the Civil War was over, and the South had laid down their arms, and came back to wives and sweethearts, to their villages or farms, Quantrill's men were classed as criminals. We had not been mustered in to the regular Southern armies. We were a band of outlawed men, hunted down and shot like wild things, like a coyote, wolf, or bear, chased from one state to another, hunted, hounded everywhere. Not a crime so dark or fiendish, nor act so mean or low, but 'twas charged to the men of Quantrill. Yes, it must be them, you know. And when the war was over, and we'd scattered o'er the land, here and there arose a rumor, yes, he's one of Quantrill's band. Some were chased and killed or captured, others ran or hid away. But it's time the truth was spoken. We are feeble, old, and gray. Let us tell our simple story, how we fought to shield our homes from the thugs and border ruffians, though we had to fight alone. Some made good while others didn't. Some gained wealth and honor too. Others took the Yahoo trail that there was nothing else to do. But no matter what their station or how well we became known, the cloud of 65 was present, and our names were not our own. But our secret well was guarded by the men who knew us well. Quantrill's oath took care of that. What you know, don't ever tell. We hear stories of Confederate soldiers who fled to Texas, as well as Indian Territory and guerrillas who fled to Mexico. during the Reconstruction period, after the Civil War. There was indeed a camaraderie amongst them which spread and infiltrated into the wide open prairies. The bond between these men could not be broken, as well as the men themselves. Jesse was the glue that held these men together. Their duty was not to serve themselves, but others in their brotherhood. They would protect and defend one another until their death. We focus now on Texas after the war. Jesse had numerous ties to the Texas Rangers, cattlemen, bankers, politicians, newsmen, oilmen, and those who had many connections to lucrative ventures. We go to the very heart of Texas, the center point, Brown and Coleman counties. That area was known as a safe haven, the hub or the zenith of the KGC, which became more connected and stronger after the Civil War. There are a tremendous number of clues that Jesse left for us, hidden in plain sight throughout this book. But in chapter 14, they all come together.
Many men back in the West hid their past in new names that they adopted. Even the famous Texas Ranger, George Washington Arrington. His real name was John Cromwell Orick, Jr. Orick, uncannily, followed the same trail as J. Frank Dalton, and I'm sure they were well acquainted. If you tune in, you will see a pattern of localities, activities, numbers, and names that form an intricate network designed by hyper-intelligent men, Jesse James included. Orick was a spy in the elite guerrilla unit for Colonel John Singleton Mosby, the Gray Ghost of the Confederacy. After the war, John went back to his home in Alabama, but after 2 years became restless and joined up with 7 men who rode down to Mexico to join the cause with Emperor Maximilian. Orick later returned to the States and took the name of Arrington. He worked for the Houston and Texas Central Railroad in Houston. He was hired as a drover to take a herd of cattle up to Brown County, Texas. This was a hot spot for many outlaws, sympathizers of the Confederacy and the Masonic Brotherhood. Arrington stayed in Brown County and enlisted in Company E for the newly organized Frontier Battalion of the Texas Rangers. Jesse James was in the same unit from June 6, 1874 to May 31, 1875 under the name of Benjamin Franklin Johnson. This B.F. Johnson was a freight driver for the Rangers. This has been verified by Bud and the writer at the Texas Ranger Research Center in Waco, Texas. We have discussed many things tied to Brownwood in Brown County and Coleman County, Texas. This is where Captain Maltby enlisted many men to form Company E in the Texas Rangers Frontier Battalion in 1874. It was a place where drovers took their cattle to buy and sell in the cattle industry. It was close to where John Chisholm had a trading post and a ranch that held the cattle for widespread cattle drives near the center point of Texas. And we later find that Jesse wrote a letter to the editor of the Clipper Herald. The letter was postmarked in Brownwood, Texas. From the pen of Jesse James, Brownwood, the hardest town in Texas, November 7, 1879.
I am playing a square game, and have settled down on a ranch about 10 miles from this town of Brownwood, and am no longer known as Jesse James. I'm not ashamed of my name. but want peace and quiet for my wife's sake. She has saved me from killing myself, and if I'm let alone, I will be a good citizen and grow up in a new life with this great state of Texas. Tell your reporter to set 'em up to the boys around and send the bill to me. I enclose a photo which was taken some years ago. It is not a really good picture, but will pass muster. Believe me, yours in truth, Jesse James.
The ranch was 10 miles from Brownwood from the courthouse square in 1879. Was this his own ranch? No, many believe it was the ranch of his superior officer in Quantrill's raiders, Bloody Bill Anderson. One historian out of Brownwood, Colonel George Day, a lawyer and DA, stated that he had found that Frank and Jesse lived with Anderson on his ranch close to the time of the letter in 1879. Day was in agreement that Jesse, Frank, and Bloody Bill Anderson lived in Brownwood as well as other KGC members. Day would later be bamboozled with criminal charges and legal matters regarding his practice in which he claimed his innocence. What was it about Brownwood, the county it set in, Brown County, and Coleman County? Why did Jesse travel there quite frequently, and all his war buddies assemble there? Those mentioned as being there who lived or visited there were Bloody Bill Anderson, Quantrill, Colonel James Russell Davis, John Trammell, Billy the Kid, Clay Allison, John Wilkes Booth, Frank James, Zerelda James, Cole Younger, and possibly even his younger brother, John Younger. Some of these men were supposed to have been killed. John Wilkes Booth, for instance, spent a year in Brownwood in 1871. Very strong evidence support that Booth wasn't killed after the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln, but lived in Granbury, Texas, and later in Enid, Oklahoma. Booth was supposed to have been killed in 1865, shortly after the murder of Lincoln in a barn. Bud traveled to Granbury and spoke with several of Booth's relatives. John Wilkes Booth had escaped and lived on. Bloody Bill Anderson was supposedly killed in 1864. Quantrill in 1865, and Jesse in 1882. But yet, they all were in Brownwood, Texas. What's so special about Brownwood? The Brownwood saga seems to begin in 1869 when Frank and Jesse were in Chicago joining other secret societies. After the war, the KGC was outlawed. So the members of the KGC operated under various legitimate fraternal organizations including Masonic Knights Templar, Knights of Pythas, IOOF, Oddfellows, and Woodsmen of the World. What were these men doing? They were spreading out, and the news spread as well, that the rebels were on the move. News reports suggest Quantrill and Bloody Bill Anderson were not killed. In a newspaper article, S.N. Wood writes from Fort Richardson, Texas, on the 29th of September 1869, that Quantrill is yet alive. He was badly wounded and ended up in the hospital at Louisville. A relative took him to her house to recover. A false report of his death spread like wildfire. His funeral was held with an empty casket, and Quantrill went south through Texas into Mexico. He went into Brazil and Cuba. What was occurring in 1869 in Brownwood? J. Longley, treasure hunter, historian, and researcher who lives in Brownwood, states that the Knights of the Golden Circle sent 12 families to settle there in 1869. Bloody Bill Anderson was one, maybe one of the first arriving in the spring of 1865, going by the name of William Columbus Anderson, and a man with the alias of Henry Ford, who many believe was Jesse Woodson James, came into the area of San Saba, Brown County from New Mexico in 1869. Longley stated that Ford was a leader in the secret order of the Knights Templar and Knights of the Golden Circle. He was a trusted friend and confidant of Brown County's William C. Bloody Bill Anderson. The KGC's plan was to rebuild the Southern economy in full throttle. The KGC supported these men by placing them in high positions of government, law enforcement, banks, stores, hotels, livery stables, and some were placed underground in the bootlegging and counterfeiting rings. There were rustlers and outlaws spread far and wide, mostly coming in from New Mexico. The plan was to make money, big money. Half of it would go to the KGC and would be converted to silver and gold that would be transferred to KGC vaults underground, one being in Austin, Texas. The money would be used to fund a second civil war and basically start their own country empire. Cattle, railroads, mines, and the illegal rings were some of the biggest money-making schemes in their plan. And you can bet Jesse was smack dab in the middle of it. He was the paymaster or controller of the KGC. After the Civil War, the Federals were wanting to round up members of the KGC. Knowing that deep in the heart of Texas where Indian raids were still prevalent, the KGC felt secure that the feds were least likely to come into this wild country. The KGC built strongholds within Brownwood and a tunnel network underneath the downtown area with their own brilliant engineers and surveyors. It was a way of continuing their clandestine activities, set up treasure depositories, and provide an escape route if the feds ever invaded. Thanks to the precise and detailed information from Jay Longley regarding Brownwood and the KGC. He has lived there most of his life and has given us insight on what was going on in that neck of the woods. Jay's information matches perfectly with J. Frank Dalton's story told to Ola in the late 1940s and the articles Dalton wrote. Jay says that he has no doubt that J. Frank Dalton was absolutely Jesse Woodson James. Jay has given us permission to use his material, which easily blends in with Bud's information and the research he has done. Bud has checked everything out that Jay has stood up on and has found nothing to be false information on Jay's part. Bud said, "It all fits." Each man had a puzzle piece to add, and the truth is becoming stronger and more supported by their effort. They have a great mutual respect for one another. Jay Longley is very careful about stepping out with information unless he is 100% sure it is the truth. He discovered on very raw photos of Jesse that have not used touch-ups to disguise blemishes that Jesse had a scar running from the top of his left cheek near his ear and sideburn, curving slightly toward the corner of his mouth. It is clear in the photo taken when he was 29 to 30 years old, and it definitely is clear as an old man of 90. There's no doubt J. Frank Dalton was Jesse.
Henry Ford. Who was Henry Ford in Brownwood? Per J. Longley, noted historian. Many of the old-timers in Brownwood thought that Ford was Jesse Woodson James because Jesse and Frank James's mother. Zerelda Samuels was seen at Ford's funeral in Brownwood in 1910. Frank James spoke to the crowd at the funeral, warning them that if they put a marker on Henry Ford's grave, I will return and blow it to kingdom come. In the book, Jesse James and the Lost Cause, Jesse told how per se. Why? Do you know? Some experts had me die at Brownwood, Texas, along about 1913, some such year. I wasn't there either. But my kin and my loyal friends let it ride, and never let on any differently. Just because the dead man going by the name of Ford happened to have a certain tattoo on his right forearm, like many of us had, they once again presumed Jesse Woodson James died, and at Brownwood, Texas. That tattoo was on the right forearm of each and every member of the inner and outer circle, as well as upon the arm of each and every official of the International Anti-Horse Thief Association of the Old Bunch. The tattoo was a thin ribbon affair with the letters Tex YS in light blue ink and tinged with red coloring.
The book Jesse James Was One of His Names by Dale Schrader. He wrote that Jesse had told Hope that he was one of the early backers of the real Henry Ford with his automobile industry, and that Jesse borrowed his name while in Brownwood, posing as a banker. Bud is not sure if this is true, but he said it is a possibility. Henry Ford in Brownwood was definitely somebody. Why was Jesse saying, "I wasn't there either"? I believe he was referring to an empty grave. In 1910, Henry Ford supposedly died. It was a closed casket. Zerelda and Frank James were there. And the exclamation made by Frank James was unusual. The family, decades later, placed a tombstone on his grave. Expert dowsers have gone over the grave site and have discovered there is no body or bones in that grave. Was Henry Ford really Jesse James? By Lex Johnston, written in the Brownwood Bulletin, April 24th, 1977, gives us clues about Henry Ford. Lex was a great-grandson of Henry Ford. After his cousin, Henry Ford II, got serious in learning the true story about their great-grandfather, Lex, who had been skeptical about the possibility that their great-grandfather was Jesse, finally started coming around and looking into it himself. His article was very good. Lex Johnston was noted as an avocation. Johnston is a columnist for the Brownwood Bulletin in his native home of Brownwood. Material for the column, Old Brown Trivia, comes from Johnston's extensive studies and research on Texas history, of which he is considered an expert. Johnston helped organize the Prestonwood National Bank in North Dallas, and the article presented him as being named president of the bank. In the article about his great-grandfather, Johnston explains that Henry Ford was known as a stranger who showed up in San Saba and was hired by the Forsyth brothers as a cowboy on their isolated ranch in the southwest part of Brownwood. During this time, the article states that the James brothers were hiding in southwest Texas and the Youngers were in Cheyenne, Texas, was where Belle Starr lived. R.D. Forsyth stated that he had met Henry Ford earlier in 1869 in New Mexico, and some believe he was briefly in Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. Sounds like Jesse, but in those days, especially after the war, men did not like to discuss their past. They had a code. An unwritten code of the frontier was that no man should ask another about his background. Unless an individual volunteered such information, his past would never be discussed and, as in Ford's case, perhaps would never be revealed. Henry Ford worked as a cowboy for 2 years, 1869 to 71. He was part of the drovers who pushed cattle to New Mexico. He could have also been on the Goodnight Loving Trail with Clay Allison. At times, he was placed in situations where he had to use his six-shooter. He was very familiar with the gun. When a poker game became violent, Ford whipped his pistol out from across the room and shot the perpetrator 3 times to save his friend Forsyth. In 1871, Ford went to work with W.L. Williams, who had a very large cattle operation in Brown County. Between the years 1872 to 1876, Ford became a stockman. He was well educated, spoke several languages, including Greek, French, and Spanish, and very prolific in math. His writing skills were excellent, and he produced literature in various subjects, especially for the business world. In 1876, Ford sought after the county clerk position in Brown County. He won the election and moved to Brownwood. He was instrumental in bringing the Santa Fe Railroad to Brownwood, and quality education, bringing schools to the prairie. He built a school, the Henry Ford School, for all ages. Ford joined a firm with the Coggin brothers, other highly successful cattlemen. They established a private bank. Sam and Moses Modi Coggin came to Brown County in 1857 and acquired large landholding in both Brown and Coleman County. An excellent article relays the story. They moved cattle to Home Creek in Coleman County in 1860. In April 1862, Sam and Modi Coggin joined the Confederate Army. During the 1870s, they engaged in money-making cattle arrangements with two of the state's most reputable cattlemen, John S. Chisholm and Charles Goodnight. Over the years, the Coggins had ranches over much of Texas and what is now New Mexico and Oklahoma. They also grazed their cattle in the Concho country, the Panhandle, the Big Bend, Indian Territory, Kansas, Colorado, and Montana. The article describes the private banking firm called Coggin Brothers and Company. It was established on March 31, 1881. By November 1883, the firm would be changed to Coggin, Ford, and Martin. Coggin, Biographies of Concho County, Texas. The Martin side of the business was Colonel William H. Martin from Missouri, who died early in 1886. In the article, it states, on December 12, 1901, the Coggins and Henry Ford entered a partnership with James M. Engel of Abilene, Texas, to form the Engel Mining Company in Boise Country, Idaho. The principal mineral produced was quartz. Where there is quartz, there usually is gold. Many were connecting Henry Ford to the James and Younger gangs. He was portrayed as a very quiet and private man. He became perturbed when asked about his past. When robbers rode into town and seized upon Ford's private bank, along with partners, Coggin and Martin, the robbers and Ford recognized each other. Ford and the robbers greeted each other warmly and carried on a pleasant conversation. The robbery was canceled that day. When Cole Younger or Frank James was in town, it was known that they were visiting their friend Henry Ford. Jay Longley was given a very special photo of a Knights Templar meeting in the old Henry Ford schoolhouse, which was built on West Anderson Street in Brownwood. Jay believes that the school was in the place where they also held their KGC meetings, having an escape route through tunnels underground if need be. Jay's friend, who was a friend of the late Henry Ford II, a great-grandson of Henry Ford, received a copy of this photo and gave to Jay. Henry II found it in an old museum. The photo was taken sometime between 1880 and 1890. The man in white is a dead man. This must have been a ceremony to bid him adieu. The man standing, holding his hat against his left chest, is Henry Ford. Ford was noted quite often in various newspapers across Texas as visiting San Antonio and Fort Worth and staying at the Pickwick Hotel. The word Pickwick has significant meaning in the Freemason Society. There is no doubt that Henry Ford was in the Knights Templar, Freemasonry, Knights of the Pythas, and most definitely Knights of the Golden Circle, and had seen his days in battle. Henry Ford II was very curious about his great-grandfather. He had dug into a lot of things and had more access to the family's history and belongings than any other kin. Henry II had told Jay's friend that he had been in the underground tunnels that went under the Ford schoolhouse, the county jail, the courthouse across Center Street, to the old Ford Coggins Bank building, and under the old J.C. Penning building. It was also under the old Porter Insurance building on Fisk Street. When they were demolishing that building, a heavy machine such as a backhoe or bulldozer fell through the foundation into the underground tunnel in the 1950s. The city filled it up with concrete immediately. Inside the tunnel, as a young man, Henry Ford II saw the plastered walls with a lot of Masonic symbols painted on them. The tunnels are now completely sealed up and hidden from the public. Jay had someone lined up who was going to show him the tunnel under the courthouse, but they backed out at the last minute. Henry Ford II had no doubt who his great-grandfather was and was close to revealing all that he knew. He was threatened by a man that if he didn't stop digging into Jesse James as being Henry Ford or the KGC, he wouldn't be living long. Henry told his friend, a friend of Jay Longley's, of these threats, and it wasn't but a couple of days later. Henry Ford II died unexpectedly at the age of 59 in 1995. Scott Walter contacted Jay Longley several years ago after learning Jay published many articles about the KGC, the tunnels under Brownwood, Henry Ford, and Bloody Bill Anderson. Walter was very interested in what Jay and Brownwood had to offer. The producer called several times begging Jay to do the show, and after several promises from the producer, Jay decided to do this, as long as his words would not be twisted and the truth would be told. It was in 2013 when Scott Walter and the crew from the History Channel came to Brownwood and the filming of America Unearthed began. The program is found on YouTube, America Unearthed, Lincoln's Secret Assassins Exposed. Jay said that there are a lot of filming and many cuts made that had more information to conclude the KGC was definitely embedded there. Jay said that he and Walter were both allowed to go into the basement of the county jail and actually see the sealed entry of one of the tunnels. At the sealed opening, an old rusted drill cable was sticking out. Someone tried their best to drill a big enough hole to look inside, but the drill bit became stuck inside the opening, which was just big enough for the cable to go through, but not the bit. They had to cut off the cable and just left it in place. You could move the cable back and forth through that hole, indicating a hollow area behind the sealed and plastered entry. For some reason, this was not shown in the documentary. Jay said the film crew were all excited and wanted to film it, but were told no. Walter used ground-penetrating radar to determine that there was evidence that there were man-made voids underground and could have been the KGC tunnels underneath the pavement and the buildings. Jay said Scott Walter, who is a Freemason, didn't mind talking about Henry Ford or the KGC, but did not want to talk about Bloody Bill Anderson or J. Frank Dalton. Henry Ford was one of the most respected and influential citizens who pushed forward the development of Brown County. A special historical plaque was erected in honor of him. Was Henry Ford Jesse? Look at his hair, his cowlick, and hairline. Look at his eyes. Like Jesse, he had the brains, the common sense, the talent, the work ethics, the education, fluent in different languages, business-wise, and was an excellent writer. Jay Longley said as of 2024, after years of research, that the jury is still out on this one. We don't know, but as Bud said, it's a possibility. William Columbus Anderson. Speaking to Ola about his Rangers days, Jesse followed up with stories about Brownwood, which at the time, I don't believe, Ola fully understood the magnitude and influence Brownwood had on Jesse. He was enlisted and stationed there as a Texas Ranger in Company E, and the headquarters for Company C would eventually be at Camp Colorado, just 25 miles away in Coleman County. Bloody Bill Anderson, per Jesse, did not die as reported near Orick, Missouri. Jesse told Ola that after the war, Bloody Bill Anderson moved to Brownwood and bought a ranch there. Bud and Jay Longley both strongly believe through their research that Bloody Bill Anderson was going by the name of William Columbus Anderson. Jay said there is no doubt in his mind. Jesse told Ola that back in my outlaw days, I went to Brownwood, Texas. I went there fairly often because Bloody Bill Anderson, under whom I'd served while I was with Quantrill, lived a short distance from Brownwood and had for some time. Had a nice place there. We know he went to see Anderson in 1886. In 1898, after the Spanish-American War, Jesse went to see Anderson again in Brownwood, and Anderson lived out his life there. Anderson is shown to have died on November 1st, 1927, buried in Brown County. There is much to this story. There are those who claim that the man in Brownwood, going by the name of William Columbus Anderson, was not Bloody Bill, but a man who came from Cole, Missouri. The story goes that he, like so many, were disgusted with the Dutch farmers on their raids upon many farms in central Missouri. We hear this exact same story from another man close to Jesse. This Anderson joined Quantrill in the fall of 1861, but dropped out of the war and moved to Brownwood in 1863. This does not jive with the story told by this man himself to a reporter in the summer of 1924, nor the old-timers, the pioneers of Brownwood, or his descendants. Over 21 ex-Quantrill raiders were still alive that year, and no one debunked this man or his life story during this period of history. It would nearly be a century later when all the naysayers came out of the woodwork. Anderson was a very well-respected man in the community of Brownwood. A street was named after him. Jay Longley had a personal interest in the Anderson family of Brownwood. His great-grandfather, Napoleon Bonaparte Longley, came from a family who had come all the way from Massachusetts and settled in the very deep part of South Texas in Calhoun County. After his father died in 1865, Napoleon had to take his father's place and began working as a farm laborer at the age of 14 in Lavaca, Texas. Napoleon married and moved on to Travis County, near Austin, and became a farmer, and then he is listed as a farmer in 1900 in Fannin County, Texas, near the mighty Red River. It is here that he and his wife, Cornelia, had a slew of kids, one being Jay's grandfather, Clem Longley, born in Bonham. His sister, Letha, was 4 years older than Clem. She was born in Burnett, Texas, where the Rangers were stationed under Captain John Sparks with Company C. It was also where Captain Maltby lived while commanding Company E, both companies in which Jesse was a Ranger. It had to be around 1906-07 that Napoleon took his family south once more to Brown County. They first made a dugout to live in and later built a home on their land, which was just down the road from William Columbus Anderson and his family outside of Brownwood. Letha met Storm Anderson, son of William C. Anderson, when she was 17. Storm would have been 30 years old when he met Letha. Storm and Letha married in May of 1907 in Brownwood, Texas. This is the year Cole Younger came to Brownwood in August. Cole was traveling with a carnival around 1907, the Cole Younger and Lou Nichols Theater Company. In the Kansas City Star, May 25, 1924, a Dr. L.E. Skinner stated, "Several years ago, Cole Younger came to Brownwood with a carnival show. Bill Anderson met Younger. The latter did not know him, as though he was dead, as reported. Anderson established his identity beyond question with Younger. It was a great meeting, and they spent much time together while Younger filled his engagement. This meeting between Cole and Anderson continued at Anderson's home at Salt Creek. Many Brownwood citizens documented this meeting as well as a meeting with Frank James. Many of Quantrill's raiders settled in Texas after the war, and many settled in Brownwood. In the 1910 census, Storm and Letha Longley Anderson were living in Brownwood, close to his father's ranch and farm. His father, William Columbus Anderson, was Bloody Bill, fondly called Uncle Bill. Storm and Letha Anderson were Jay's great aunt and uncle. Jay remembers Letha very well, a very nice woman who would come over to their house to visit. Jay lived with his grandparents mostly when he was growing up. Letha never spoke about her father-in-law being Bloody Bill, nor did her brother Clem. But Clem's wife, Beulah Fay, Jay's grandmother, spilled the beans quite often. His grandmother, Beulah Fay, would always point to the house where William Columbus Anderson lived, along Salt Creek, which was a magnificent house back in the day. It had a 5-point star on one of the eaves of the house. She would tell Jay that this house was where Bloody Bill Anderson lived, or that's where Uncle Bill lived. She told Jay that a lot of outlaws would come to stay there. Uncle Bill kept a register of his visitors in which the list included some pretty famous people. She had known Uncle Bill for 31 years. Before 1920, Letha and Storm Anderson had moved to Corona, Lincoln County, New Mexico, and by 1930 they were living in Roswell. After Storm died in 1935, Letha moved back to Brownwood. What really opened a lot of people's eyes was the story that came out in the newspapers. By 1924, William Columbus Anderson began to talk of his past, but only to a select few. He knew his life would soon reach the end, so he wanted to get a few things off his chest while he had a sharp mind and memory. He was one of the first to reveal his true identity and his connection to Quantrill's raiders. Did he have permission to reveal his true identity? Jay Longley said no. He was high enough in the KGC that he didn't require permission, but he only could reveal that he was Bloody Bill, and nothing, I mean nothing, about the KGC or his death would be at the doorstep. The reporter who interviewed William Columbus Anderson numerous times that summer, Henry C. Fuller, wrote an article in the Brownwood Banner Bulletin in 1924, relating the story told to him by Anderson, claiming to be Bloody Bill Anderson, using the name of his father, William C. Anderson. His father was a hatter who was killed in a dispute over a horse in 1862 by a friend. His mother, Martha J. Thomason, was struck by lightning in 1860 and had died. His sister, Josephine, died in the Union prison that collapsed in 1863, and 2 other sisters were severely injured. His life was extremely sorrowful, and his whole motive for his bloody past was revenge. The story in the newspaper set off a firestorm. Fuller wrote that he spent several hours with the famous old warrior and talked at some length of the eventful and tragic past in which Uncle Bill, as a young man, played an important part. The article was published in the Houston Post on January 27, 1924. Daring pioneer dreams of tragic times. The reporter said he had a remarkable memory while Anderson was relating his time as a lieutenant for Quantrill. Newspapers nationwide began printing the story with more detail and depth. The Houston Post story on Bloody Bill in 1924 stated that in 1863, Bill Anderson and Quantrill had a disagreement. Anderson left Quantrill and came to this part of Texas, where he settled and once turned his attention to the pursuits of life. And since that time, 60 years ago, he has been a most useful citizen, known and loved by all as a friend and neighbor. And although he is a great joke teller, many of which are on himself, he rarely talks of the stirring days with Quantrill in Missouri and Kansas. In the San Angelo Evening Standard, one of Quantrill's bravest men lives in Brown County, by Henry C. Fuller, ran on October 17, 1926, describes Bill Anderson and his home, which was built in the autumn of 1865. He fell in love with the area around Salt Creek, and Jay said he named the creek himself. The news article stated that Anderson does not like to attempt to resurrect the war or the stories. He is spending the evening of his days quietly and never talks of the tragic past in which he played so important a part, unless questioned by a close personal friend. When Jay Longley started the Bloody Bill Anderson Mystery Group on Yahoo 18 years ago, the intent was to uncover Bloody Bill's true story in Brownwood, Texas. Jay had the support of many old-timers, historians, and direct descendants who stated that Bloody Bill Anderson lived out his days in Brownwood and never was killed. This was confirmed by Ola when she typed out the manuscript, writing word for word from Jesse's own mouth, also revealing that Bill Anderson lived outside of Brownwood. There's just too much evidence to ignore. Bud was one of the first members of Jay's group. Jay became well acquainted with Bud, and they worked together on several research projects. Per Jay, Bud was the main source of information that was contributed to Jay's website. The writer was able to access these sites in 2022, and with Jay's permission, was able to retrieve the information and photos to enhance this book with Jay's great collection of items on Bloody Bill Anderson and Jesse James. Sadly, the sites have been taken down as of 2024. Jay was kind enough to share more information and photos in 2024. We owe Jay a tremendous amount of gratitude for his preservation of history and searching for the truth. With all of Bud's research and knowledge of Bloody Bill and Jesse, he had to go to Brownwood himself to investigate. He drove from Purcell to Brownwood, 300 miles, to look things over. He drove to the Staley Cemetery outside a small community of Early, Texas, in Brown County. It was not far from where Anderson lived. Letha Longley Anderson was buried there. Bud asked two women to help him find William Columbus Anderson's grave. They knew right where he was buried and knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, he was Bloody Bill Anderson. Bud did a lot of walking that day near Anderson's home site. He found many carvings on rocks, carvings on trees along Salt Creek. He recognized a lot of symbols of the KGC that were not noticeable to the human eye unless you knew what to look for. They were there. He firmly believes that William Columbus Anderson was Bloody Bill. Many people he spoke to in Brownwood confirmed the stories. Jay said the house had interesting signs upon it, especially the five-pointed star. He gave me a lesson in what it meant. Oh yes, the five-pointed star, a symbol of the Lone Star State, an emblem chosen by the Freemasons who developed Texas, which established one of the largest Grand Lodges in the world. The 5 points symbolized the 5 points of fellowship for the Freemasons. The 5-pointed star is also considered Venus, the great goddess, also called Isis. It is the third brightest celestial body in the heavens, behind the sun and moon. Venus is considered both the evening star and morning star, the first and last star to be seen from evening until morning. Venus's path, as it appears from the Earth, outlines a 5-petaled rosette at the completion of its course, appearing as a pentagram, which is found in nature also. This is the Freemasons' belief, which includes their sacred geometry, and the pentagram is seen in many of their symbols and designs. The leaders of the Republic of Texas utilize the star in their flag. Then it appears in the bonnet blue flag used in the Civil War by the Confederacy, which all tie to the KGC, which merged with the secret organization called the Order of the Lone Star, setting the stage for the Texas Revolution, fighting for independence from Mexico. The 5-pointed star was always worn on the brim of Bloody Bill Anderson's hat. Jesse also wore this 5-pointed star on his hat when he was U.S. Marshal in Indian Territory. It was worn by the KGC during the Civil War on their left lapel or chest to prevent them from being killed by both brothers in the Union and the Confederacy. It was also adopted by the Texas Rangers, first appearing during the Frontier Battalion days. The Rangers would have a silversmith or blacksmith make their badges out of 5 and 8 peso Mexican silver coins in the shape of an encircled 5-point star. With the 5-point star prominently displayed on Anderson's house, it was important to him. You can also find these stars on old buildings throughout South Texas, especially old Masonic buildings and banks. In 1927, William Columbus Anderson died. There is no indication that this too was a manufactured death. I'm sure Jesse attended his funeral. An entry in Bud's book has to be read very carefully, Ola said. In 1945 was the last time Jesse went to Brownwood, Texas, to visit at the ranch of a very good, longtime friend of his, Bloody Bill Anderson. Notice she didn't say he went to visit Bloody Bill, but only that he visited the ranch. Jesse told Ola some of Bill's grandchildren are living on that ranch, if I'm not mistaken. It sounds as though Jesse was checking things out, possibly treasure sites on Anderson's property, in which he frequently checked on all the other cache sites. What secrets, what treasure is buried there? Brown and Coleman County, the center point of Texas, there is a reason why these counties were picked by the KGC. Remember, these men were never individuals in their endeavors, nor were they a handful of men. It was a huge organization, and each were given a specific assignment. Jay Longley believes his great-uncle, Storm Anderson, Bloody Bill's son, was sent out to Roswell, New Mexico, to be a sentinel to keep a watch on treasure buried there. Jay believes there is a large KGC depository there. Could it be on Chisholm's ranch? Could be. Jay Longley has been a treasure hunter for 54 years. Little did he know that when he got his first metal detector, when he was 14, he would have an entire gold mine of treasures beneath his feet. He believes Brown and Coleman County and Central Texas contain more lost valuable treasure than any other area in the U.S. or the world for that matter. There is more history, secret history, that has yet to be uncovered. Jay graduated from Brownwood and graduated from Tarleton State University. His studies included government and politics. He furthered his education at the University of Texas in pre-law. He worked as an assistant sergeant of arms for the Texas Senate at the state capitol and became fascinated in this field and history. Jay was co-founder of the Central Texas Treasure Club in 1981, elected president of Central Texas Treasure Club in 2018. He has been involved with many treasure hunts, not only KGC gold, but other types of treasure and artifacts that were buried by the Spanish, Mexicans, Indians, and 49ers. Albert Pike and Randolph Marcy had heard of these stories and followed through with identifying hot areas. I believe that was why places, towns, and different landmarks were mapped out to help find and secure the treasure. Jesse's job in the KGC as comptroller was to find and secure the treasures, relocating if needed, and then burying the gold and silver gained in criminal activity along with the hard-earned money made in the business world of the KGC members. Why? To fund a second civil war. Jay believes that this answer was just a smokescreen. He believes that this may have been the intent at the beginning, but more knowledge and more prosperity turned their vision towards supporting the South and the nation as a whole. This would make a good ending to the story, but I don't think it's the end. There is more to it than we can ever imagine. But what happened to all the gold and treasure? Much of it is still underground, but I don't believe it was just abandoned. I believe there is still a purpose for it. Jay Longley has located 3 probable KGC depositories within a 100-mile radius from Brownwood. There is one he knows for sure of, as he has located one of the marker caches surrounding it. The depositories were big underground vaults where they kept the priceless treasure, not only precious metals, but weapons and priceless Egyptian artifacts and treasures from around the world gathered in the 1800s. It may be much more than we realize. It's similar to the Oak Island treasure, which was buried in the 16 to 1700s or earlier. A good example of a depository is Victorio Peak in New Mexico. Jay located a marker cache with the help of an expert dowser. This was in 2009-2010. He contacted an old man who had learned the art of dowsing from his father, who was a dowser. The art may have been passed down to him, and also the dowsing equipment and techniques of old. The old man was extremely excited about the opportunity to do this. He told Jay he had been dreaming of these depositories every night for 20 years. He had knowledge of what could be under the earth in Brown County. The man used what Jay called were Spanish balls or marbles that he would hold. He would hold a certain color for whether you were looking for water or for precious metals. Jay said the man was amazing. The dowser described treasures underground that were placed in extremely intricate design vaults to sustain through the ages. It appears to be exactly like Oak Island, in which there are 4 or 5 layers or levels under bedrock at least 20 foot down. Each level was supported by beams or planking of elaborate and exotic wood from Europe and all over the world. Jay mentioned they used rosewood, but he couldn't remember what the other wood was. The only explanation is that the main depositories had to be treasure brought over and protected by the Knights Templar. Jay says that sacred knowledge was passed down, eventually reaching the Order of the Lone Star and then into the Knights of the Golden Circle. There were depositories such as Victoria Peak that treasures of the world and many other precious metals were gathered and hidden in the 1880s. The depositories or treasuries are scattered all across this country. One such place is the Wichita Mountains in Oklahoma. A man from Brownwood, Dean C. Saylor, was interviewed by Steve Wilson, author of Oklahoma Treasures and Treasure Tales. Mr. Saylor told Steve that he knew for a fact that Jesse and Frank James buried $180,000 in the Wichitas. He learned this information from an old outlaw who lived in Brownwood, named Connolly. This man Connolly was friends with Jesse and Frank, and later Frank James came to see him quite often in Brownwood. Connolly told of being a lookout man for Jesse and had one of the 3 cowhide maps in existence of the treasure. He said the treasure was in a sealed cave near a natural stone corral. When Jay first started corresponding with Bud Hardcastle, Bud sent him a large packet of confirmation on Jesse and the KGC. Jay took that knowledge, information out of treasure books, and Bob Brewer's skills in deciphering codes and symbols of the KGC, and put it to good use. With this knowledge and Jay's own research, natural skills, being familiar with the land, using expert dowsers, the depositories and marker caches can be found, Jay said. If you find a marker cache, you can pretty much find the main depository that is usually 20 foot deep. This is the big prize. It takes a lot of work, mentally and physically, and a lot of guts. The KGC used an underground grid designed by Albert Pike to lay out their caches. Sacred geometry. The marker caches are around the main depository in certain points within a circle, like a spider web. Marker caches are found around the perimeter of the circle and along the lines that form triangles similar to a slice of pie, pointing toward the center point where the main depository is. Each marker cache is a certain distance between the other, usually appearing to be equally distanced apart. The marker caches may be 3 to 5 foot deep and contain gold, silver, small treasures, and sometimes a trinket to indicate a clue. If a person came onto a marker cache not knowing the complex system or layout of the entire design, or those who are without this knowledge, then to the untrained eye and mind, they would think this is all there is and be satisfied with the treasure that was found. But those untrained in this magnificent skill and knowledge would be disturbing the design, the clues, the direction and location that has been superimposed upon each detail. I know this has to be frustrating to those serious treasure hunters when several marker caches are disturbed and the clues have been destroyed, including symbols, carvings, etc. As one gets closer to the treasury, the depositories, the danger increases. The danger could be in the form of booby traps of all kinds, and from those who lay watch over them for whatever motive or purpose they have.
There's much more treasure to be found within the book of Bud Hardcastle, the Truth Tracker. Many secrets, many clues will be revealed. As Bud says, they all fit. It's big, hun. It's really big. Brownwood held many of the answers. There were men involved in that part of the country that we didn't expand upon, such as John Chisholm, Charles Goodnight, Clay Allison, and Billy the Kid, mostly in the cattle business. But it's all in the book. Is it a coincidence that in 1855 in Coleman County, a little community named Trickham became a trading post for ranching activities of John Chisholm? In 1862, Chisholm raised cattle there to furnish beef for the Confederates fighting in the Civil War. Trickham was near Mukewater Creek that joined Home Creek, which flowed into the Colorado River, a perfect area to establish headquarters for Company C, Frontier Battalion. John Chisholm also maintained ranch headquarters on Home Creek. Chisholm had cattle in all parts of Texas, ranging from the Concho River along the Colorado and to the southern part of Cook County, which is in the area of present-day Gainesville, Texas. Of course, Most of us history buffs know more about his South Spring River Ranch south of Roswell, New Mexico. The ranch was later called Jingle Bob Ranch, the largest ranch in the United States. There's so many clues and connections to all the characters of this book. Are they coincidences? Is it a coincidence that Coleman County and Brown County are the center points of Texas? There's an historical marker between Brownwood, 26 miles south from Brownwood on Highway 377 towards Brady, that marks the geographical center of Texas. Ironically, it was close to where Trickham, Texas lays, where Chisholm had a trading post. There were no fools. Are you? Jay continues in his hunt, more on a smaller scale because of the loss of his most trusted friend, Colin, who died of Lou Gehrig's disease in 2011. Jay keeps himself busy being the president of Central Texas Treasure Club and loves what he does. Thank you, Jay Longley, for your help and support of Bud in contributing to the uncovering of this intriguing and compelling truth in American history. The uncovering of this intriguing and compelling truth in American history.